there are people that are actually in tears after they go through the exhibition, after seeing and engaging with these works of art. You can go into that exhibition thinking that you're going to a Sikh exhibition, but you can come out of it feeling so connected to everything else around you. In the early 1760s, Punjab experiences. Imagine somebody turning up now in the Middle East, and they bring about a peace to the Middle East for 40 years and are a patron of the arts. What took me by surprise initially is that it was very hard to fund the show. It cost us about £500,000. He sends the Afghan forces back. He has 5,000 men. He's 16 years old.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to another episode of the Swords Podcast, brought to you by Ramblings of a Sea. I'm your host, Amar Singh, and in this episode, we're diving into one of the most fascinating exhibitions of 2024, the Ranjit Singh Sikh Warrior King exhibition at the Wallace Collection. At the time of recording, over 30,000 visitors had already experienced this incredible journey through history. However, it hasn't been without its critics, and I certainly have my own question. Is it hero worship, or does it truly bring history to life? Join us as we dive into history with co-curator Davinder Singh Toor, uncovering the fascinating stories behind the exhibition, its exhibits, and the lasting impact they've made. Before we dive in, hit like if something grabs your attention, share your thoughts in the comments, and if you're enjoying the content, consider subscribing to support our channel. So now, let's get straight into it.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Always a pleasure and privilege. Thanks for the invitation.
No, not a problem. It's the least I can do. I think as in everyone can go and watch or listen to the previous podcast that we've done. You've been instrumental in what you do, and that's had such a massive impact on people like myself and others that are kind of interested in Sikh history and wanting to get to know it on a more kind of hands-on level and more engaging. But we'll get into all of that. The first thing that I want to ask you is, it's almost in reverse, in that, so I had the pleasure to come down and see it, and it was absolutely amazing. However, there was a few people who I spoke to afterwards, and then obviously reading in preparation for this podcast, who have certain criticisms of the exhibition. One of them being that it almost edges on to hero worship. The image of Ranjit Singh is almost bigger than him as a historical figure. What do you have to say to that?
Yeah. I mean, it's it's interesting. I mean, you're always going to get different perspectives, of course. I'm quite glad actually that we're doing this recording actually about halfway through the exhibition. So we're about 3 months in now, and I think interestingly, we know so much more now than we knew, let's say, 3 months ago or a few months ago when we met there, and I've learned so much, I think, over the course of that. First of all, I think it's I personally actually haven't had anybody approach me and saying that. Yeah. So that I find interesting, because it's if those, obviously everybody's got different opinions on the show, but over 30,000 visitors we've had, and we're probably going to expect another 30,000 over the next 3 months. But I haven't had anybody come to me and say that, which is interesting. What I do remember, of course, is right at the beginning. We had various press turning up right at the beginning, and we had one article in the Telegraph, which also needs to be noted. Is the Telegraph, and I found that experience of kind of and we still got a good review in the Telegraph, but there was that idea of kind of is this hero worship?
Did you expect much of forget the criticisms, but did you expect kind of that feedback from the Times, the Telegraph, and kind of these bigger players?
I think what you expect is initially, this is a niche exhibition in a mainstream, beloved English museum, and here we are doing an exhibition called Sikh Warrior King on Maharaja Ranjit Singh. Some people don't know him. Some people might find the idea offensive. It's an arms and armour exhibition at its core as well. And what I found very quickly, and I think many people experience this when you're dealing with journalism or the press, is people are looking for a story. People are looking for a headline, and so I don't take those criticisms, for example. I think some people probably just went away and read that article and then regurgitated those opinions without actually forming their own opinions. Also, the journalists that came in, I'm fairly sure that they didn't know who Ranjit Singh was before. Maybe they did a little Wikipedia search before,
but it's not.
And then you got 20 minutes to whiz around an exhibition. You and I are there for a couple of hours.
At least.
Did they read the catalogue? There's a question I'm asking. Did you read the catalogue? Did they go through the audio guide? Did they come to any of the programming? Did they? In fact, this particular journalist didn't even want me to give them. I was in the space, and they didn't want me to give them a tour of the of the space. So,
okay.
and then I remember we had this comment in that, which is I think that's the one that kind of fueled. A lot of people kind of don't think independently have had done that thinking to think that same thing.
Yeah.
Whereas I remember at the end of that quick little review, I then quickly, almost mic shoved in my face to say, should the Kohinoor go back to India, yes or no? And it's that kind of thing. So I kind of realised, okay.
Trying to get the headline rather than
there you go. That's what we want. Okay. And then very quickly, I think it says in the article, this is what Davinder's opinion is on that.
Yeah.
So that doesn't really interest me. But I think, but I have been thinking about the idea. And so I would say if somebody did, do the audio guide, read the catalogue, you will realise how nuanced this exhibition is, and also how we show the multifaceted nature of Ranjit Singh. For example, there's a painting of Ranjit Singh's cremation in the exhibition that shows sati being practiced. If anybody wanted to glorify or hero worship Ranjit Singh, that wouldn't be in the show, right? Simply. And I think the other side of it is, in Ranjit Singh as a character, is just to kind of contextualise things and just to kind of place us, think about that moment in time and what he actually was as a person. We're witnessing in our current times, the Middle East crisis in the Middle East, right? And I don't know what the death toll is at the moment, but I think current numbers probably at 50,000, in excess of 50,000. And those are the official numbers, right? So unofficially, we don't know what those numbers are. So let's say the death toll is 50,000. So in the early 1760s, Punjab experienced the same thing in terms of a death toll with the Vadda Kalukara, with the Afghan invasion, mainly non-combatants killed within a few days. Those numbers. 15 years on from that, there's an illiterate young man, one eye, right, who rises to power, who becomes a patron of the arts, right, who brings a peace and stability to that region for 40 years. Imagine somebody turning up now in the Middle East, young, one eye, disfigured, illiterate, neither Muslim nor Jewish, and they bring about a peace to the Middle East for 40 years and are a patron of the arts. I think there's an element of that does need glorifying. So we've got to really put him into context. He was a remarkable figure.
Just going back about, like you were saying about the Vadda Kalukara, you mentioned obviously non-combatants are killed very quickly within a few days. How does that happen? As in, is it literally the invasion force turns up, rounds up the village, executes them and moves on? Or is it there is a fight and they're caught in the midst of it? Like as in...
So if we look at some of the early accounts, what they're telling us is that, these raiding forces, the destination ultimately is Delhi, and everything in between, kind of on the way in, on the way out is getting in the way, but it's looting. It's an opportunity to kind of maximize your gains, whether it's taking back human slave labor, whether it's taking back jewelry, whether it's just raiding the coffers, whatever it might be. And we find that these non-combatants are basically getting in the way. And interestingly, we also know that from this period that the Punjab is predominantly Muslim. So actually, when we're talking about, that carnage, we're actually talking about largely a Punjabi Muslim population that is wiped out from invading Afghan Muslims largely. And also we know, even in the kind of Misl period or just prior to Ranjit Singh, when these Afghan invasions are occurring under kind of Shah Zaman, you've got Sikh Sardars that are making alliances with the invaders. You've got other Sikh Sardars that are fleeing and running away. Ranjit Singh in that time is this one teenage figure who, rounds up a few thousand men and repels them. So it's a crazy time in history. And I think so, So I thought those little facts kind of make me really intrigued about who this young figure was, which is why he was a subject of our show.
And how was he, was he just lucky enough to escape the carnage, and like you mentioned, he rounds up some of the troops and they go to fight these invading forces? Does this allow, in some sense, for him to build a name? Because, for argument's sake, the invasioning forces from Afghanistan actually then helped the Sardars bring in the Rakhi system, because they're like, well, actually, if you pay us, we'll look after you. So is it similar with Ranjit Singh in that the turmoil is actually almost not an opportunity, because I doubt he sees it as that at that point in time, but actually fast forward 10, 15 years, he's built his name out of it. He's kind of...
Completely, yeah. No, but I actually think that it completely is an opportunity. I think these are... I don't think anybody particularly has the kind of foresight to plan that many years ahead. What it more is a case of is reacting to what the situation is at the moment. We know that the missiles... We know that he's born into a smaller confederacy. So he's not particularly, his father's not that powerful, although he is a big name at the time. But and we know that the Bhangi Sardars are in charge of Lahore and kind of mismanaging it. And Ranjit Singh, we talk about what he did and him building a name for himself. When this 30,000 strong Afghan force arrives in 1796, and like I said, some of those Sardars flee, and Ranjit Singh gets 5,000 guys together and they repel them and send them back. And this is the first out of 3 invasions. He sends the Afghan forces back. He has 5,000 men. He's 16 years old. Imagine a 16-year-old.
That's nuts.
Young, we say a boy. He's a 16-year-old for us now as a kid.
Yeah.
Whereas at that time, Ranjit Singh's father is about 15 or 16 when Ranjit Singh is born. Right? So when Ranjit Singh dies, his father's about 26, 27 years old. Right? And his father, so there's about 15, 16 years between each generation. He's already, for the previous 5 years, already going into battle, into war. So he's experiencing this. But the moment his father dies, so this is happening when he's 16, but the moment his father dies, Ranjit Singh's life's at risk, right? And is at risk from other Sikh Sardars who need him dead, right? Because he is this little Pachangi, he's this little baby snake, basically.
He's their opportunity now in terms of, like, he's at a vulnerable age and he hasn't established himself or anything.
Right.
Yeah,
take him out now. So he has that guidance. He has those mentors, namely in his future mother-in-law, Sada Kaur, from the Kanhaiya missile. So he has guidance. He has protection from people like Sahib Singh Bedi, who's revered, who is respected, and so he is protected to some degree. And then his path, he's assisted, and he's not necessarily a unifier in a sense, but he dominates. He overpowers. The old tales say that when the chief of a missile would die, Ranjit Singh is the first person knocking on the widow's door to say,
let's get married.
Not necessarily let's get married, but you're getting protection from me now.
Fine, I see.
Right,
okay.
so essentially he's also a bit of a protection racket too.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, as you say,
but the whole
he's
thing
also
is...
Yeah, exactly. He also is. There's a number of marriages of alliances, marriages into other houses, So this is part and parcel of that culture of nobility which they've inherited. Yeah.
Would it also be fair to say, in some senses, that Ranjit Singh is lucky? And I guess in history there has to be an element of luck, because that's just how it works, I guess. But in terms of, like, for argument's sake, his marriage to Sada Kaur's daughter, Matab Kaur, like, that's arranged by the parents, right? And that's done when they're relatively young. Sada Kaur's husband ends up being killed in battle, I think, by Ranjit Singh's father.
That's right, yeah.
And yet it kind of works out for Ranjit Singh in terms of Sada Kaur is actually like the kingmaker in a sense. Him being married to her daughter obviously locks that in. Like, how much do you think... I guess you could replace luck for destiny, but, like, how much do you think Ranjit Singh's trajectory from, as you were saying, like a 16-year-old boy into essentially one of the most revered figures in Sikh history post the Gurus and the Shaheed, like separate from the Gurus and the Shaheeds, like, how much do you think luck or destiny is almost kind of intertwined in that narrative?
Yeah. Well, so my answer to that is a bit... it might come as a bit of a surprise to you, but I don't believe in luck. So I'm not a, I think I've always kind of gone by this principle that luck is for lazy people. Right. So Ranjit Singh, we can say that there is there's some there's a sense of karma or destiny, in the sense that there are just it's not a completely passive process for him.
Yeah.
You know, and other people's actions which affect him
Yeah.
are also a result of their need for self-preservation.
Yeah.
You know, so is Sada Kaur really thinking about the future of Punjab and Ranjit Singh and planning, or is she thinking about, hang on a second, my husband's just been killed, what's my future going to be?
And control.
You know, it is a patriarchal society, right? So, you know, we know that by that time, you know, Jai Singh Kanhaiya was withdrawing. What is the future? What does she see in this young guy, right? So, but we need to give credit to Ranjit Singh in the sense that he is a doer,
Yeah.
right? So he takes action. He finds himself in any particular certain situation, like we might find ourselves in today. You're at various how much of it is fate, how much of it is various junctions, and this idea of whether you have free will to make a decision or not is debatable. But, you know, we have to assume that he has choices, and he is navigating his way through that, and doesn't always go well for him. But he is a man of action, and he is a man, I suppose, in who we would see kind of almost forges his own destiny. You know, so this is also interesting in our exhibition, where, you know, in the exhibition we have this bust of Dalip Singh looking backwards into the story of Ranjit Singh, and we don't go beyond Ranjit Singh. And Dalip Singh's story is very much about us lamenting,
and it's romanticized
trauma,
to the nth degree.
And, you know, it's about give this back to me. You stole
Yeah.
we don't put that doesn't sit with Ranjit Singh.
No.
Ranjit Singh is not that kind of a character. Ranjit Singh is, well, you took that, I take it back.
Yeah.
He's that kind of a character. So he has that, you know, he's this precocious, kind of tenacious, young, energetic figure who is, imagine, like, he's a young teenager who's coming up against adult warrior Punjabi noble men.
And it's only like
in
50
the 19th
years,
century, 18th century.
It's like 50 years after Guru Gobind Singh, right?
Yeah, and it's like, who is this character that can overpower them, dominate them, outwit them, you know, all whilst being seemingly kind of uneducated
and one-eyed and all of the rest of it.
Exactly. So he's a symbol, I think, very much, you know, as you mentioned, like the fact that we have this great Sikh king of ours, you know, with one eye, is like this wonderful visual kind of constant reminder of overcoming difficulty and adversity and challenge. I think it's just so beautiful, the fact that we now look at him and he's got this one eye, and yet he's regarded as this fantastic warrior and leader and full of charisma. He's not a handsome guy, you know, but he's supposed to be attractive as a personality. So yeah, he's very interesting. Completely flawed as well, but
as every human being is
exactly,
too, I guess.
exactly.
Yeah. Especially with Ranjit Singh and the Kohinoor, and then how that narrative runs into Dalip Singh. Like, how much do you think we've romanticized, and when I say we, like the Sikh Punjabi community, have romanticized that history? For me, one thing that I really enjoyed was that it was just there. Like, as it was there, you read the facts, you got engaged with it, and there wasn't really anything persuading you towards one understanding or the other. And so for me, I thought it was quite refreshing, because it, as you were saying, it doesn't focus so heavily on the Kohinoor or Dalip Singh. But what is, like, your opinion of the fact that we take these, like, these are just two people in it, for example, and then we romanticize them to a point where that's all that is then concentrated on? Like you were saying, that chap came in and was basically like, all right, what should happen to the Kohinoor? Like, that in itself goes to show how much that narrative is the dominant story.
Yeah.
Whereas there's stuff like the fact he's 16-year-olds and kicking ass on the battlefield, like, that is just nuts. And surely it's not a healthy thing for us to continue to do with our history either.
Of course, yeah, it's a really good point, and I'm really glad that you experienced that and felt that, because that's what I'm interested in, and there's also that is an intention of doing an exhibition like this is bearing all, and it's quite an easy thing to do. You know, you do your research, you come across your accounts, you come across the artefacts, the kind of real tangible material heritage of the day, and it does all the talking for you. It raises the questions for you. A miniature painting will sit us, have us looking at it, picking out all the details and asking all the questions. So I think it's really crucial. I think it's crucial because, there's an element, I think, of romanticizing something, because actually it's quite convenient for us to have an issue to have a problem, right? Is actually, you know, let's what, you know, let's at least we've got something to talk about if we can claim the Kohinoor back every year and lament how Dalip Singh was treated. You know, God forbid that problem ever gets fixed. Maybe we subconsciously don't want those problems to get fixed, if they were indeed problems in the first place. So I think there's an element of kind of just having something to cry about, I suppose. And you know, whereas actually, you know, much of what you see in that exhibition may not have been seen by people. Maybe people didn't know those objects and pictures, whatever photographs existed even, and now suddenly they are just opening up, you know, our eyes to a world that once existed, characters, relationships, families, emotions, all of those things that we can relate to because we're just the same as those people, you know. And that's why Ranjit Singh as a character is so crucial, because he is human. He is flawed. He does have problems. He does suffer from, you know, avarice and lust or whatever it might be. Yet he also is kind and generous and all those attributes too, but he's greedy too. You know, so all that stuff. So he has all that going on. And I think what it does is that it just brings that all to the surface so that we can really understand how is it, if we really want to understand who we are today, how did we get to the point where we're at? You know, you and I are sitting here now in England. You know, Punjabi's probably complaining about the warm weather in England now on the hottest day in England. Like,
it's roasting today.
You know, we're more English than the British. You know, how do we get here? What's our story? And understanding that this, you know, you can have a romantic idea when we look at history, particularly our kind of the history of the Gurus, is imagining this really perfect moment in time where everybody was doing kirtan and, you know, we were all wonderful doing gatka in the battlefield, wherever all those videos.
We're all hugging and being best of friends.
Wonderful, everyone looks great, we've got muscles, or whatever it is, all that stuff, right? And then you think, hang on a second, like the Gurus faced issues from day one, right? And the things start to, you know, the Gurus turn up at this moment in time and everything is evolving. Time is the strongest thing and everything is changing shape constantly, and you're surviving and reinventing. And, you know, what current state of invention are we in at the moment? And for me, it's not and for this exhibition, it's kind of understanding our place now, but not, and not judging it.
And that's the biggest, freeing feeling. Like, I don't know quite how to put it into words, but like when I walked into the exhibition, I have some awareness of some of the items by default of your kindness of showing me some of these things before, or just having seen them on a website or something. But there was stuff in there that I had never seen or even heard of. But it was beautifully arranged, providing a narrative that wasn't leaning towards any direction. It was kind of like, well, this is who this person is, this is who this person is, this is what's kind of happening at the time. And then you're like, hold on, that just makes that whole narrative.
It's funny, isn't it? Because what we're kind of almost picking out is actually the exhibition not having an agenda. Can sometimes actually upset those who want it to have an agenda.
Well, I assumed with Ranjit Singh it would be kind of, he's this king, he establishes control, he makes Punjab really safe, and then it all just gets pissed away by his kids once he dies. But it was nothing of the sort. And that whole that whole kind of assumption was just thrown into the bin as soon, like, you walk into the first room and it starts at a period before Ranjit Singh. So it doesn't even start with him. And that whole context, like we've obviously spoken about it a little bit at the beginning of this, most people wouldn't be aware. If you ask most people like Sikh history, it's kind of like Guru Nanak Dev Ji, Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Ranjit Singh turns up and then we're in Britain. And so providing all of that was brilliantly balanced. And just, I guess another way of describing it is that the artifacts, because they belong to so many different people, and I don't know, a soldier or a descendant of Guru Ram Das Ji, that one really stuck out with me. You bring all these characters into the forefront, and it's not just Ranjit Singh, and it's not just the royal family, however you want to call it. And that to me was when I left and started reading the criticism, I was like, hold on, I don't think these guys have been to the same exhibition.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, I often kind of question, well, who actually has even gone? Do you know what I mean? Like it's a, you know, I mean, I think landscape's changed now, but, you know, this isn't We touch upon obviously faith and religion, but it's not a religious exhibition.
No.
We touch upon history and characters, but overwhelmingly, what I've witnessed there and what I understand from the museum is that visitors are actually having a really emotional response to the exhibition. There are people that are actually in tears after they go through the exhibition, after seeing and engaging with these works of art, and also I think it's all just there. Like there's as much there as you want to take. Like you can quite easily spend, as we did, half an hour, 45 minutes talking about one picture. Yeah. There's so much to explore. The challenge when you're doing an exhibition like this is, you've got 80 to 90 objects or whatever it is, and like, how do you pack in? How do you cram in that story?
Yes.
What's the attention span
and
of
connect
the audience?
those threads through the
what are the all the intellectual levels that you're trying to target with an exhibition like this?
Especially considering you don't want to kind of bring information at a level where most people are like, all right, I have no idea what that's referencing.
Yeah, and equally, you are, you're casting the net quite wide. You want to, and many of our visitors are visitors who are going to a museum for the first time.
Yeah.
Or coming to London for the first time. Different age groups, 3 generations of a family. But at the same time, we also want to cater for those people who have been to the previous exhibitions, who have bought the Gashi House book, for example. And now we're going, well, actually, I want something more because I know about that already. So now we're trying to, so you're trying to do a lot with it.
I think it's amazing to hear the amount of thought and the amount of thought and planning that's gone into it in order to cater for so many different people and levels. And so that planning definitely for me has come through. And I think you're right. I think I had to ask you about the criticisms because I just like to kind of nip that in the bud. But I definitely think you're right that a lot of these people may not have even gone, let alone given it the time or attention that I think it deserves. And like you were saying how you can spend 30 to 40 minutes on just one piece in the exhibition, and I think what's interesting is you could also spend 30 or 40 minutes talking about what's not in the exhibition. So there's that big photo that you've got blown up, and that's only part of the painting. And so you could go on forever actually about telling us, as you did when we were there, about, well, actually over here there's other people and how that all ties in. Earlier you spoke about how the society Ranjit Singh is in is very patriarchal, as most of us are aware. But then you have people like Sadaqat, and everyone, and obviously everyone probably is more familiar with Rani Jindal and kind of her engagement with the British. But what is society like if at one point, if it is patriarchal at one point, but then equally allows for these women to be in positions of power? Like Sadaqat is to some degree the leader of the Misl for a period of time. Rani Jindal to some degree is kind of the queen, or however you want to label her, for some period of time. I know they're almost anomalies, but how, like, from your understanding, like, how does that kind of work?
Yeah, I think that those aren't positions for them that are engineered. I think sometimes, I think we live in this society now where we're almost having to recreate or reinterpret and share the past to fit our current ideals now.
Yes.
And there's this idea of kind of presentism where we're looking back at through the lens of today and thinking we want women's rights, or we want equality of of I don't know, between in terms of sexuality or whatever it might be, or social classes, and it just wasn't. So we can't make that up.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so I find that, for example, it's hard to find research, and I think historians of female personalities will also tell you that it's hard to find the sources that talk about those female personalities. They aren't very often documented and mentioned. Rani Jindal, you never hear about her until the moment she turns up, right? So she is not preparing for power, right? Yeah. So like, for example, I think we might have mentioned it to you before, but if I said to you today, tell me who the 8th or 9th or 10th in line is to the throne of England, you're not going to tell me, right? You're going to take your time to work it out.
George or something? I don't know.
Well, we don't know. You don't know.
No,
I don't know. Right? I don't know. And
Beatrice or something?
Yeah. But whoever that person is, and we don't even know who it is, right? They're not sitting there preparing to take the throne of England.
No.
Right?
Yeah,
we don't even know who they are.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
That was who Jindal was, right? Jindal was. She filled that. The number. Ranjit Singh held power for 40 years, right? A single ruler for 40 years. who is planning for so many assassinations to happen within the space of a few years for her to come to take the throne?
Yeah.
You know, we know that, you know, the women both of his Zanana or his wives were presenting children as their own, always happened to be sons, right?
Yes.
That are being bought from the bazaars, that were born to a courtesan, because we can understand or infer from that the stability or security for a woman was attached to her presenting a son that could then rule.
So it's almost
And
like
then
Henry VIII.
Yeah, and off the back of that,
Yeah.
she would be safe.
Cool. Okay.
Right. So if they're needing that, right, you know,
I see.
they are finding themselves. Sadaqah finds herself in a position where she's holding the fort.
And that's by default
Right.
of her father, her husband being murdered.
Exactly.
Okay.
So now now she needs to get some alliances. She needs
And it's
to
that
protect her
survival
future.
instinct again.
Exactly.
Okay.
You know, Jindan, you know, it doesn't end well for Jindan. It doesn't go to her plan backfires, you know, inviting the British into Lahore, you know, she's separated from her son. You know, very quickly things turn around on her.
Yeah.
You know, so the way that we look, I think the danger is that the way that we look and present these characters, we've got to be very careful about not representing, you know, the truth
In the
of what
modern
it was.
lens.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, let's not pretend.
So I guess to kind of summarize, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, society is patriarchal, but these particular women are almost by circumstance put in that position.
Yeah.
Like Sadaqah's husband dying, Rani Jindan's husband also dying, and then Dalip Singh being her son, and that connection.
We literally have about 5 women or something that we could probably name.
Yeah,
Right?
yeah.
Against how many
Hundreds
men
of thousands of
men
yeah.
that we were naming throughout that period. So what does that tell us in terms of the imbalance of it? It clearly just from those numbers, it clearly wasn't there set up in a way that women could rule.
Yeah.
Right? It wasn't the way that it was being engineered. And I think obviously that shouldn't also come as any surprise to us, based upon just you know, in I think in the early 20th century, time of World War One, I think the female infanticide rate in Punjab was about 50%.
Yeah.
Right. So where's the equality with 50% of
Well,
girls being born?
You only have to go to like what the 1970s, and women in this country couldn't own a bank account on their own or something, or maybe it was a little bit earlier. And I guess, and this is also why I enjoy these conversations, is because that point about not taking our modern lens and kind of placing it back in the past definitely biases or colors you in a particular way, when actually their context was completely different.
Exactly. I think, you know, there's a distinction between speaking about the past as it was and justifying the past.
Yes.
We're not
yes,
justifying that. You know, you're sharing what we know about it. And I think the fact that we can still talk about some personalities, some female personalities who do come out, who are notable, who are amazing, who are doing some, you know, wonderful things, brave, you know, things in that time. That speaks volumes in itself.
Yeah.
You know, that we even have those personalities to speak about. No, it's certainly. I mean, you know, that's just one aspect, and the one aspect of the exhibition that kind of comes out, and we've tried to kind of, you know, share as much as we possibly can on that front.
I didn't get the chance to ask you when we were at the exhibition. Well, because we spent so much time going around the actual exhibition, but like, just in a couple of sentences, like, as in, I'm sure you spent hours and months and loads of meetings and all sorts of toing and froing to get the collection together. But what goes into putting together something like that? Because, like, you've obviously got stuff that's from your own collection. You've got the throne that's from the V&A. You've got the painting of Maharaja Ranjit Singh from the Louvre. I've mispronounced that, but hey, my French is crap. And you've got whole loads of other stuff. You've got that bust of Dalip Singh as well. But more so, like, how big of a task is it? Like, how long does it take? Like, how much planning and like how many hours have you had to spend, like, cumulatively, do you reckon, just organising it?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that I think any exhibition in a public space, in a museum, in a major museum like that, is like you begin the planning about 3-4 years in advance.
Wow, okay.
So in terms of the programming, you know, and a museum will know what exhibitions are running for the next sort of 3-4 year cycle. So you got to. So the initial conversations were around 4 years ago. So like around sort of COVID sort of time, those initial conversations were happening around, you know, what could a narrative be, you know, what's possible, and then based upon what the ideas are, you then come up with a budget for the show, based upon what you ideally want to show in the exhibition. How much does it cost to cover the cost of borrowing these objects.
Oh wow, okay.
So you're then thinking about that and thinking about basically, is there a powerful enough, strong enough story here to tell, and are people going to be interested in it? Yeah. So you start doing that, and then you effectively convince the trustees of the museum and convince the museum that this is a story worth telling. And then you work, and then the next task is to try and find the funding for it, which is all donor based. So it's 100% has to be funded through donation. There's no money from the government from this. There's no money from the museum's own funds from this. You are then looking at where can we, basically persuade donors that this is a fantastic exhibition to support.
That's insane. I didn't realize you had to get the whole thing funded as well. I just assumed museums had budgets and other whatever, but that's not the case.
I think that's really, there's a couple of things here. One is that we think that all of this material heritage is preserved somewhere, or it must already exist in a museum, and it isn't. Some of it's in a state of kind of disrepair, or not catalogued, or whatever it might be, in hiding somewhere. But then the other big issue is that we naturally assume, particularly within these museums who on the surface are wonderful, amazing, powerful, dominant kind of institution buildings, you think that they are rich, you think that they have funds. We're in a difficult moment in time, particularly post-COVID, when no one was going to these spaces. So I think many of these museums are kind of living on the edge a little bit, kind of bringing people in. So it took quite a lot of convincing to get a relatively niche exhibition like this. Not much is known about Ranjit Singh as a figure, as a character. Why would anybody possibly want to come to this show? So that process began about 4 years ago, and then in the last 2 years, kind of things step up. You change gears, and then you move forward with it.
Hopefully you're enjoying the deep dive into history and the incredible Ranjit Singh Sikh Warrior King exhibition. There's still a lot more to come. So if you're finding value or enjoying the conversation, make sure to subscribe and let me know your thoughts in the comments below. For those who want to go the extra mile, you can support us on Patreon or become a YouTube member to unlock early access to all future podcasts. In addition, if you're passionate about history and looking for your next great read, visit our shop at ramblingsofasik.co.uk. Explore a collection of over 160 books and 30 comics, along with a diverse range of historical artifacts and ephemera, alongside modern day reprints. There's something for every history enthusiast. So now let's get back to the podcast.
And then how do you get museums like the Louvre, as in the V&A, I kind of understand this slightly better because it's in London, and I'm sure artifacts and items circulate all the time. And I'm sure it's the same thing with the Louvre, to be fair. But how do you persuade an institution like that to hand over their items? Or am I just kind of making it seem bigger than it is? And actually, once you put it together, they're like, yeah, right.
Yeah, it's kind of pretty much like that. I mean, I think it's everybody, all of the institutions that have been involved with the show are really excited. They're really encouraging and forthcoming. And you come up with a concept for the show. You really, you justify why it is that you want this really crucial loan from the Louvre or the V&A or the British Museum, Royal Arms, whoever it might be, and you say, well, we think that your object will be really crucial to our show for this. It fills this part of the story. We're also looking to borrow from these other institutions. It's this is a 1 in a quarter century opportunity. It's not, because also you mentioned the throne. It's not just about going to see the throne. It's about seeing the throne in that setting, in that context, with other objects that you will probably never see it with again. Certainly probably not within the next sort of 10, 20 years, I think, at least. It's taken 25 years for us to do this show since the V&A show. So it's and then we just find that naturally the museums, and particularly I think the benefit from me was working with someone like an institution like the Wallace Collection. It's the Wallace Collection that are making those requests. The Wallace Collection have their reputation, they're known, they have their objects. And so, and then these museums came together and collaborated, and it makes the whole experience really kind of joyful, basically.
But I do think that when you walk from, it's not technically a separate room, there's a divide, but once you go from the room that's before the image from the Louvre into that room, you can feel the presence of that painting as you enter it. And for me, it was quite, not a shock, but it was quite like, okay, I've never seen this before. And then I think also what you're saying, like in the context of everything, and you've gone through however long we had spent in the exhibition up to that point, and all that information kind of being sat in the back of your head, and then you're like, whoa, okay, I haven't seen this in all its glory, and then the way it's lit up.
It's the first loan to the Wallace Collection from the Louvre as well.
That's insane.
So even for the museum, it's like, it's wonderful, you know, that SG, they managed to achieve their first loan from the Louvre, and you know, that picture in itself, which is, it's a favourite for many people, you know, 'cause it's so striking. It also kind of speaks to why this exhibition is quite powerful, in the sense that it is cross-cultural. That particular painting in itself is so cross-cultural, isn't it? Like, it's commissioned by an Italian Jewish officer, painted by a French artist, taking inspiration from Punjabi Muslim artists, Imam Bakhsh Lahori. Like, there's so much going on in that picture, and now it's there in France, and you know, and painted during Ranjit Singh's lifetime. So you then start asking questions about how all these cultures were interacting. You know, what the in the little tricolour waving in the background, what's the French influence in the court of Lahore, at the court of Lahore. So you know, we're picking up on human stories, but we're also picking up on, you know, you can go into that exhibition thinking that you're going to a Sikh exhibition, but you can come out of it feeling so connected to everything else around you. So, and that's it's really wonderful.
It's only just come to me now, which is that obviously because of the British connection with India and the Raj and the Leap Singh coming here and all the rest of it, we very much focus on the British story. But I think one thing that's really brilliant about that photo is it actually puts into context how European Ranjit Singh's court, because actually it's full of French and Italians, it's not full of British people. And I think that's also is what is quite striking, because you come learning about Ranjit Singh and the period before him and the soldiers and the arms and the armour, and then you walk into this room and it's like, hold on, there's all of these European generals also involved. How much do you think, because of the fact that we're in Britain, we don't actually necessarily give the European nature of Ranjit Singh's court perhaps as much focus as we could, considering how influential these people are?
Yeah, I think it's just a reminder that we know very little about it, and that actually, where do you go to seek out this information? You know, it doesn't surprise me, because nobody really discusses it and looks at it. You know, maybe because I think a lot of our history, or learning of Sikh history, is synonymous with of our kind of religious education. And a lot of that happens within a kind of religious gurdwara or Sikh camp type environment. And it seems that, you know, Ranjit Singh's been removed from that scenario. You know, he's outside of that, because he's seen as this. So he's that. So he doesn't belong. And then what do? We cut off this whole, you know, this warrior culture, the culture of nobility. This, you know, you know, Punjab is a kind of sovereign nation. That whole thing is kind of cut out of that story. So we don't explore that very much. And once we dive into it, you know, we find this plethora of information in terms of how cross-cultural kind of his court actually is. And all that information's there. It was so much so that we dedicated a whole section to it, the Ferengi section in the exhibition.
Considering how much time, like 4 years, just in terms of the planning and all of the various artifacts that from your own collection and from all over the world, was there anything in particular that you came across and you were like, I don't know, for whatever reason it was memorable? I don't know whether that was because it was in a state of disrepair, or you didn't know whether it was like you'd never seen it before, or it was something that was in a collection somewhere and they'd pulled it out. Was there anything of a surprise, I guess? Was there anything that, as you're kind of putting this together, you were like, oh, I wasn't expecting that to pop up, or whatever it might have been?
Yeah, so I think in the exhibition there are a number of, we're in this kind of interesting time where, you know, Sikh art is gaining popularity. You know, much of it because of, you know, what people like yourself are doing, and what that means is that, you know, certain objects or items are surfacing in the marketplace.
A lot of which are fake.
Exactly. No, we've got to be careful, because when there is interest but lack of supply, that's when we get fakes, right? So, but the genuine pieces that are appearing take us by surprise, and that's really exciting, because then you've got something that actually has never been seen before, or never been catalogued before, never been exhibited before, and you know, there are a few pictures like that in the exhibition. And then I think there are also, however, and this is why it comes back to the question about museums wanting to lend. Sometimes you're requesting to borrow something which a museum actually doesn't even have on display. Oh. So you're borrowing something which may be in reserve, maybe requiring restoration. So then the museum is really keen because it gets to share something they ordinarily wouldn't share. Oh. So, for example, borrowing the portrait of Jean-Francois Allard from the Palace of Versailles, for example. We borrowed that from the Palace of Versailles, and they were like, wonderful, because it gives us a chance to be able to restore this picture before we give it to you.
So it's almost like an excuse for them to make it prim and proper by you guys requesting.
Yeah. Okay. And if in the process of that, you can support the conservation of something, then it's
why not?
It's a double win, isn't it? Because you're now preserving something
for the longevity for others
and
to
sending
see.
it back, and also you've sent it back with kind of more kind of prominence, and maybe it will have a chance to be exhibited one day. So, many of the things, we mustn't forget that, lots of, about 99% of objects that a museum holds are actually in reserve. 1 to 2% is on display, right? So it's really, crucial that these kind of events happen, these exhibitions happen, because we get a chance to bring those pieces out. So it's there are a few things like that in the show, and then you're uncovering certain bits of information as you explore something. So, for example, coming across Ranjit Singh's horse's harness from the Royal Armouries, that being conserved for the exhibition, coming out on display for the exhibition. Seeing the Sikh armour from the Royal Armouries with all the mail and the plate, and realising that also it had trousers too, right? And then those coming out and being conserved and being displayed. Or Ranjit Singh's armour, his actual armour, with the helmet, and so we've got things like that, and then that painting of Darbar Sahib by Bishan Singh for over 100 years has probably been in a private collection in France. And then it surfaced, probably one of Bishan Singh's finest pictures, and it had never been catalogued or published before. Wow. So, and here we are now seeing it for the first time, or the public is. So,
and it's, I guess I've given so much away already, but I think for me what was really fascinating about that is the level of detail in that image makes you think that image is massive, but actually when you see it, it's, in my opinion, it was tiny. I was like, where's the rest of it? But actually once you get closer to it, you see the level of detail is just insane. But also seeing them in real life just changed the whole perspective, because you can see these on a computer screen and you can kind of guess it's not the same.
There's no substitute, is there? I mean, I think there is. It's. I don't think we need to be too hurried. Essentially, about the digital age in that sense. I think as humans we need that one-on-one access.
Yes, especially with art.
Yeah, you need to see the kind of fragility in an object. You need to see how light bounces off an object. You need to see that in front of you to believe that truth.
And
that
how it
actually
kind of
exists.
changes as you move your head and stuff like that. Yeah.
Exactly. Perspective, shapes, sizes, and all that. No, it does take you by surprise, and it's a miniature painting, miniature tools, miniature brushes
of such a big landscape. It is. So it's for me, it was mind-boggling to see it in kind of like face to face, and then be like, hold on, all of this is crammed into this space, but yet it's done in such a way that if you took a high quality photo of it, you'd think this is like A3, A0 or whatever, and it's just not. What was then perhaps the most challenging aspect of putting this together? Like, what was the thing where you go, you know what, maybe I can't be asked with this?
Luckily there wasn't ever a moment in time when I kind of thought, forget this, I'm not doing this, but
and I'm glad that didn't happen.
Yeah. No. I think. Sorry, it's because I had a lot of support. I think I worked with a really fantastic team at the Wallace Collection who were just so passionate, right? So they were just really passionate, really enthusiastic. The director there is wonderful, and he was really kind of keen and kind of energized, the exhibition. So that made things very easy for me. I had a really good partnership. I think what took me by surprise initially, which kind of now looking back doesn't really take me by surprise, is that it was very hard to fund the show. So we know that, I knew that by the time that we get this show off the ground and it opens, I know that the Punjabi community who are going to engage with it, I know that they're going to turn up, I know that they're going to be energized by it and find it really powerful. and word of mouth will spread. And
there
was no doubt in my mind, and that's exactly what's happened, which is great. But actually finding the funding for it from Sikh Punjabi patrons was near impossible.
Out of interest, it's like, how much does it take to fund something like that? Like
So,
a ballpark figure?
Yeah, so the exhibition, for funding wise, it cost us about £500,000.
Wow, so it's not a small amount of money.
No.
And this is all donation based?
All donation based.
Wow, okay.
Yeah.
And that's literally to pay for the loans, obviously the space.
Yeah, you're paying for, advertising, insurance,
Oh,
travel
yeah,
of objects, publications, programming. You're paying for so much, restoration, conservation, all that kind of stuff. There's so many elements to it, and it very quickly adds up.
Yeah.
An advertising campaign on the Tube, for example, that we had, it's still running now. And, all of those things, they cost. There's no, and you're just covering costs. There's
no profit.
There's no profit for anybody. There's no fees. A museum isn't charging you money for a loan. You're not paying the museum a fee to borrow something. Private collectors don't get paid to lend their things. That's not how it works. You can barely find the money to just make their things travel.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So no one's ever talking about. But I think what's shocking, and I think what needs to not be masked by the kind of visual success of a show like this. There's a danger that you see a show like this and think, okay, when's the next one? Well, when's it happening? Is it 2-3 years away? Why don't you? The amount of times I've been asked, well, where is it going next, Davinder? Like, is it travelling to thing? Are you taking it to Canada? Are you taking it to America?
Yeah.
And you think, no, it's not happening because actually the Sikh response to helping fund it was just embarrassing, basically. Yeah. And I was really embarrassed because it was, hardly anybody came forward to actually put money forward. And I'm not sure, where people think that these kind of things come from. And so we're really behind on that front. And, and then you understand why it's been 25 years.
Yeah.
The V&A, we keep talking about this V&A exhibition and, I'll keep banging on about how I was a volunteer and all that nonsense. Like, you keep speaking about that, but then anybody smart will say, that's fine, that's 25 years ago. But obviously we had a few SOAS shows that we did in between. But this is the next major kind of show on, that's got central London kind of footing. So that was difficult. But it has been engaged with. And, once people go there, they realise, and they're bringing their children, people of my generation who are born here, maybe young families going, well, actually, how do I educate my children about this? And they're bringing their parents and their grandparents too. But what we need to kind of acknowledge here is that, in the course of trying to find the funding for that exhibition, less than 10% of the funding came from Sikh patrons. Less than 10%. The flip side of that is 90%, came from non-Sikhs.
People who are actually interested.
But from non-Sikhs.
Yeah.
So
but isn't that also in a way kind of poetic, considering it's Ranjit Singh's exhibition and actually his court is full of Europeans? I'm not trying to justify the Sikhs our community being crap at funding stuff like this. Like, I'm ashamed. Like, just to hear it, it's sad and it's a shame. But as a historian, I can only look at it and go, well, hold on. There's almost an irony in this, which is there's 90% non-Sikhs funding it, and Ranjit Singh's kingdom is predominantly run by non-Sikhs.
Yeah, well, I think it's more of a case of like that the 90% of non-Sikhs funding it were more signed up to the story.
Yeah.
They were more signed up to the personality.
And wanting it to be out.
Wanting to be out there. And also there's a fundamental problem beneath all of this is actually, how cultured or learned or sophisticated actually is our community. It might be doing really well financially, per capita, whatever it is.
Yeah.
And that gets talked about a lot, and fair enough, we might have, expensive cars and expensive weddings and all the rest of it. But, if I think back to, I don't know, how many people in our families, when you go to their houses, do you see bookshelves full of books, right? And, or books or art books or someone practicing art. We don't see that very often. But they might have a Mercedes in the driveway.
Oh, of course.
Right? And so that is the issue, the underlying issue, is that you can't convince someone who isn't reading, for example, that they should be the importance of a show like this for future generations.
So obviously, as you said, it's taken 25, and I've got another question about that as well, which we'll come back to. But it's taken 25 years since the last exhibitions, and you've had lots of people obviously ask you, like, what's going to happen to it next and all the rest of it. If, for argument's sake, the funding happened to kind of gather together in a easier manner than it seems this talk, would that make putting an exhibition on again a lot easier, or is there more involved than just the finance side of stuff?
I think it would help massively. I think that would. It's the biggest barrier because we are, it's not just me. There's a group of us. We're sitting on the research. We're sitting on the artifacts. We're sitting on that storytelling. We know that the best thing to come out of this is knowing that we had a wonderful response from the Sikh Punjabi community. If 50,000 Punjabi Sikhs came to this exhibition, for example, it's not just a Sikh exhibition, but let's just say 50,000 came. That's like 1 in 10 in the country, right? That's unbelievable, isn't it? So so we know that there's an appetite. If there wasn't an appetite, I'd be worried.
Yeah.
Right. So,
but they expect it for free, which is half the problem.
Yeah, but this was a paid for exhibition, and I was really surprised and pleased that people still came.
Yeah,
it was a worry of mine. Would people actually come to a paid exhibition? It's not that expensive relatively. So, but I think that the funding is the essential thing, because if you have funding in place, you're in a far better position to be able to go to a mainstream institution and say, look, we've got the patrons, okay, we've got the idea, we're sitting on all the information. Do you want to work together? How can we engage each other's audiences? Who are you? Who is the audience that you're trying to nurture and bring in? And how do we engage our audience that we can bring in with other things in your museum? I had this wonderful. I should have taken a picture. A kind of just seeing it like a Gandhi kind of dressed in white, in his 70s, walking around the Wallace Collection, and I just saw him and he's just there looking at a Canaletto, right? So he's been to the exhibition, and now he's taking a tour of the exhibition. And now he's just there staring at this landscape by Canaletto, just looking at it. I thought, what a wonderful picture! What a wonderful kind of juxtaposition of seeing. That was a moment of success. Do you know what I mean? It's like you would never imagine that, and that's what we need to do to kind of help broaden horizons, I think.
What are like your main aims that you hope to achieve with this? Like, I think that little anecdote that you've just shared is kind of like a perfect example of what you would like to achieve in terms of getting our community into those institutions and having them not just there in order to look at the Sikh art or the Sikh exhibition, but actually just there, just kind of in those spaces. Besides perhaps something like that, what are your, I don't know, if someone said at the end of this, what do you hope to have achieved by putting this exhibition on, what would like the top 3 things be on that list?
I think there's one key thing really, and I think that is, if you think back to, I don't know, your childhood, it may have been different to mine, but I'd imagine, mine, I was that V&A thing, 99. That was my first time in a museum, right? That was my first time going to see art connected with our history, our heritage, in a museum space, and I was 18 years old, right? And I'm seeing that then, 18. Whereas we know, I had friends from other cultures, other backgrounds, and it was normal for them to go to a museum with their parents when they were 4, 5, 6 years old, running around, drawing pictures, doing that. I imagine that there weren't that many people from our generations that had that experience. And, so if we are normalizing the relationship, between us and these institutions, that accessibility, there's no barrier to entry, and being able to ask questions and seeing something connected to, your past, your heritage, or where your parents came from, or the land that you've been visiting on your holidays. Like, I think that to normalize that is extremely powerful. And I don't think that we're even able to understand the impact of that at the moment. We're in the moment, but
I think that's a really interesting point, because if I look at my own childhood, and shout out to Mum if she's watching this, because she watches every single one and then she'll give me feedback. So hello, Mum. I have to give her credit where it's due. She used to take me to these museums all the time. Summer holiday, would go to at least 1 or 2 museums, would make a day of it, would get the train to London. And so for me, when I went to the Arts of the Sikh Kingdom exhibition, it was a shock, because I was like, hold on, we actually belong in these spaces? And it's interesting how just that early exposure to museums and these institutions can have such a big impact. I think that's probably partly why I like history and all the rest of it. What is your personal favourite piece in the whole collection?
Oh, God. You know what? I've been asked this question a few times, and my answer keeps on changing because actually it's changed. It's changed throughout the exhibition, and kind of like how I've engaged with objects in the exhibition, and also just witnessing how other people have been engaging with objects in the exhibition. And I think we actually mentioned it, but my current favourite at the moment is that painting of Darbar Sahib by Bishan Singh. And the reason I think for it, as I've been, I think much of what we feel when we go to these spaces, when we feel emotional about something, is that we're not just looking into the past through this object, which in itself is fragile, vulnerable, decaying before your very eyes. Yeah. But actually, I think what's happening is that it's a vista into a time that once was. But in that particular painting, you're witnessing Darbar Sahib with lots of trees, right? And we don't see that now. You're looking at Darbar Sahib with all the educational bunge around the prakarma. You don't see that now. Right. You see multitude of faiths coming together in the prakarma, and we don't see that now. So that is it's wonderful, because that as one particular painting or object, it's beautiful, it's rare, and it forces us to ask questions. Yeah. And so you can talk about so many things, as you kind of unpack that picture and pick out all the characters, whether it's the sadhus, the Brahmins, the Parsis, the Sikhs, the Akalis, or whoever it is. So I think that's a very special piece.
Or the fact that the view that you see isn't correct, but we won't go into that again. There were 2 items that I had questions of that I'd obviously love to ask you. One is, and I've mentioned it before, there was the sword that belongs to a descendant of Guru Ram Das Ji. What does that... And I found that quite interesting and a bit taken aback by it, and I took videos and photos before the lady came and told me to stop recording. But what does that say perhaps then about the militarization of the Sikhs? Because there's a kind of an idea that in the kind of the general narrative that Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji turns up after Guru Arjan Dev Ji's Shahidi, and that's kind of the red line that is crossed, and the militarization almost happens immediately. But if you start digging into sources, you very quickly come across that Guru Arjan Dev Ji has a retinue of men on horseback. But to see something material like that was a bit of a shock. What do you think that says then about the narrative that we have at the moment about kind of militarization and...
I think much of what we kind of stick to, and when we're historically looking at something, is almost based upon the kind of sections of a children's history book from Sikh history, how we quickly jump from one thing to the next. And then suddenly, this is why these objects, these pictures are so important, because they immediately just force you to ask a question. So, in the exhibition, for example, you've got a painting, Guru Arjan, from the Nansuk School of Art. Excuse me.
No.
Which shows Guru Arjan armed.
Yep.
He has a sword in that picture.
Yeah.
That's unusual.
Yeah.
Right, so that makes you ask certain questions. And as you rightly say, Arjan Mal, he's Arjan the wrestler, right? Which is what he referred to, and we know that Guru Ram Das is opening wrestling schools. Yeah. Guru Arjan hasn't been executed yet.
Yes.
Right? So there's a culture of that. How does that warrior culture sit with this culture of nobility, which is very naturally evolving? Right, the darbar of the Guru is taking shape. What happens when somebody gets powerful or has a following? You're going to start getting enemies. They're going to start to attract the wrong kind of attention from certain folks. Money will come, wealth will come. Yeah. It's just a natural part of that process, and with that, comes all of the other paraphernalia. That particular sword that you mentioned belonged to a man called Guru Sadhu Singh Sodhi.
Yes.
And it was amazingly discovered at the Wallace Collection. It's in the Wallace Collection's own collection, and it was discovered during the course of their cataloguing of their Indian arms and armour, which is going to be published soon.
Yeah.
It's we know that Guru Sadhu Singh Sodhi is a descendant from Guru Har Gobind, therefore Guru Arjan, therefore Guru Ramdas, through the Tirmaliye kind of
Oh, okay,
line,
okay, wow.
Right? So he's from Baba Gurditta Tirmal, he's from that kind of line. So Kartarpur Sodhi from that line.
Oh, wow.
Right, and he's a contemporary of Ranjit Singh, early 19th century. That's what we're talking about. And interestingly,
That's mad.
so his sword has ended up at the Wallace Collection.
Yeah.
Now, has his sword ended up at the Wallace Collection? It's in almost pristine condition via the Lahore Toshakhana breakup, via the treasury being broken up in the 1850s. Is that when a lot of these pieces dispersed from the treasury in Lahore? Was it gifted to Lahore? Was it an exchange? Was it, how did it get there? Is that where it even came from? It's a possibility because that's where many of the other things came from.
Yeah, yeah.
Right, as the Punjab was annexed and then the treasury broken up. And then there's also other little... So, we're kind of unpacking how it gets to Richard Wallace or the fourth mark, because I can't remember who acquired it now. But also what's interesting is that most other Sikh swords and other Sikh arms and armour will have, in the inscriptions will say, Akal Sahai, may the immortal one protect, and then it will have your sword, Akal Sahai Amar Singh will be your sword, right? This says Guru Nanak Sahai. It says Guru Nanak Sahai, and then it says Guru Sadhu Singh Sodhi.
Okay.
That's a very unusual
Inscription.
Yeah. Guru Nanak, so may Guru Nanak protect, and then it says Guru Sadhu Singh Sodhi.
Okay.
And interestingly, so you have that, and this is the wonderful thing about how lots of this research comes together in this exciting time that we live in, because there are a number of us who have various disciplines doing something, and collectively our collaboration is what ultimately. And I saw recently Wallace Singh, who you've had on your podcast before, who's doing wonderful work with Suraj Prakash and the manuscript tradition, and he mentioned that there was a picture that he came across, or that was also connected to that kind of lineage that also said Guru Nanak Sahai. So, and then we had a little exchange saying, I just said to him, well, there's also this sword that has this too. Maybe there's a connection. Maybe it's their way of doing things in that particular. Is it them kind of finding a slightly different way of doing things?
I think what's interesting is that in the background, I've been researching this. I've been trying to do this series on Janam Sakhi for ages, and I've been researching it in the background. And I'm sure you've seen, I've been sharing snippets here and there. What's interesting is that most of the Sikh history we have about Guru Nanak Dev Ji actually comes from the Janam Sakhis at the Tirmaliya, right? And if you were to, as Guru Gobind Singh Ji says, when Vaisakhi happens, there's 4 groups you need to keep away from, and one of them is Tirmaliya. But what's interesting is if we throw out that Janam Sakhi, 90% of Guru Nanak Dev Ji's history goes with it. As I researched further, it turns out that there are 4 main branches of the Janam Sakhi. There are far more than 4, but there are 4 main branches, and most of them come off the Tirmaliye and the Ram Rais and these kind of apostate groups, of however you want to call it. And the more that I dig into their Janam Sakhis, I'm always fascinated by the fact that we've accepted the history, although we discount the group, but that's a separate thing. What's also interesting is that these Janam Sakhis, most historians and secondary works that I've read on the original manuscripts are basically like these groups are all at the same time, post Guru Arjan Dev Ji, fighting for the legitimacy of the Gurgadi. So them calling back to Guru Nanak Dev Ji is almost their way of saying, we've inherited the legitimacy. And so for you then to have mentioned it on that sword actually perfectly fits in with that whole ideology. And it's also fascinating that it's from that lineage, because it also goes to show that these groups were rich, powerful, and all the other things, because actually the sword is, go and see it. Go and see it, and you'll understand what I mean. So you've definitely helped me with my research there as well by explaining that. And also I wonder, and this isn't necessarily a question that can be answered, but I also wonder how that sword, as we were discussing, ends up where it does, considering surely after Sodhi there's other lineage.
There is, and it continued, but but the family still has artifacts and grants to this day. Right? So they're a noble family, wealthy, lands and jagirs and all the rest of it. So they have that. They'll always claim that line back to the guru. So, but we don't know how these objects are traveling. So this is why even that whole discussion or argument around, we simplify it and reduce this argument around colonial loot, for example. We don't know what those interactions fully were. We don't know who is gifting something to somebody, who is acquiring something, seizing something, capturing something, looting something. There are so many different, verbs that you can kind of use to kind of describe how something is being acquired. But also, interestingly, we're discussing this now because an Englishman in the 19th century decided to pay for and collect that object and preserve it and keep it.
I thought it was important enough to do that, or whatever reason.
For whatever reason, maybe just as a decorative object. But it's quite poetic in a way that we are now unpacking that here, having been born here, looking at that object, trying to work out how this, what this deeper connection is between the kind of Qadar Prasodis and Richard Wallace.
Yeah. And then those connections, and then it turns into all of this. Like, you manage to take these threads and connect it to everything else. I wasn't expecting that answer, to be honest with you, especially the Guru Nanak Dev Ji bit, because I may have seen it when we went to the exhibition, but it didn't register in perhaps the same way it has now. I know the exhibition hasn't finished, and we're recording on like August the 12th or something. So if you haven't gone to see it, please go and see it. But what are your plans for the future?
I don't fully know yet, to be honest with you. If I'm complete, and this isn't me kind of being cryptic or mysterious. I'm very much, I've learned so much in the last 3 months of this exhibition. We close on the 20th of October, so we've got a few more months left. I'm kind of waiting to see where the dust settles with this.
Okay.
I'm kind of waiting to see what the engagement is like, and then trying to work out what everything that's been learned through the process. I'm very much of the kind of idea that we've hopefully set a new benchmark for ourselves with this exhibition. I wouldn't want to go back from that.
Okay.
So whatever, if we keep pushing those boundaries, thinking about how to improve any kind of future engagement, and then just waiting for the right kind of opportunities or people really to turn up. I think what you're always looking for, like I mentioned, I was very fortunate in just having really wonderful people to work with. And when you have a group of like-minded, brave, passionate, passion is crucial.
Passion is the key,
right? People, you don't even need to know what you need to do right here and now, but you just need to know where you want to get to. And then you just make it happen. And it just happens easily.
Yeah.
And that's what's happened with this show. So as I get older, I think I realise that you just got to be patient and wait to see who turns up. And what those opportunities might be. So I'm not in any kind of immediate rush to kind of get into something at the moment.
No, fair. I don't blame you. I think just the scale and size of what you've put on is impressive, to say the least. I think I could go on and on with kind of adjectives and superlatives to kind of describe how much of a good job it is. My last question, and this is more on a personal note, but those massive blown up images that you've got in the exhibition, what's going to happen to them afterwards?
We haven't decided yet, but I think no. If you're gonna, I can certainly put your name down if you want to decorate the front of your house. No, your living
Just
room.
have it on the front. On like
I
the
know.
doorway.
Yeah, I know that there's quite a lot of people at the Wallace Collection who've already kind of like kind of put little red dots on the Jali screens. All the pierced kind of, they make fantastic kind of screens in people's homes and things. But no, absolutely everything. Much of what we used to design in that exhibition in terms of its architecture was recycled from the previous exhibition. So we recycled, repainted and done. So recycling the sustainability of that exhibition was crucial. So nothing is going to be very quickly just taken down and chucked in the bin or anything.
Okay,
like that. So if they're salvageable, and they can be pulled off
in one piece or whatever.
Yeah, we have done it. We have done it before. I remember there's there was a blow up that we did once for a science exhibition, which I think is in a museum up north now. So yeah, so it's just let me know which one.
No, thank you. Last thing I just want to check is there anything that you think we've not included or you want to mention or whatever just before we wrap up? I know it's incredibly hot as well, so I have to thank you for your time.
No, thank you, man. I mean, no, I'm good. I'm just happy just reacting to whatever you want to know.
No, thank you.
If you think that I'm good. Yeah,
we spent about made it this far. Today we delved into the exhibit and the Ranjit Singh exhibition at the Wallace Collection, gaining valuable insights from the co-curator Davinder Singh Toor. I'd like to take a quick moment to say thank you to Davinder for making the time to join us for this conversation. We'd obviously love to hear your thoughts on what we discussed, so feel free to drop a comment below. If you're listening on a podcast platform, a 5-star review would be greatly appreciated. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on any future episodes, and to the fashion police picking on me for my great shorts, it was the hottest day of the year and that studio was just too damn sweltering for me. So once again, thank you for tuning in. Whether it's day or night where you are, I hope you have an amazing time ahead and we look forward to seeing you in the next one.